Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for, already going too far here. Trying to get it so I can see the screen and move my chat box. So welcome to our October info session here online about guilt, shame, and regret. There is a chat bot that you can find at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to put questions and stuff in there. There is a recording of this particular info session, and we're actually trying to do recordings for our info sessions. So in the future, if you want to come back and use it as a resource, you're able to do so. I will open up once in a while for comments with regards to everyone. And so if you do have a conversation or you think that part of the conversation could be important, or you have questions or anything like that, I do believe you may have an option to raise your hand or something like that. I know sometimes we can set it up that way. I'm not sure if it is. However, just wanted to kind of give you some of those housekeeping abilities and such. And Tristan, our wonderful communications coordinator, is actually on here. So I did see, made a post that if you do want the web be if posted on the website email, okay, or you can email her directly at twilm@caregiversalberta.ca, and she can provide you the link for this particular info session. So again, welcome. I'm Lisa Adams, the caregiver here at Caregivers Alberta. I am super excited to talk about guilt, shame, and regret. One of the things that we go through when we are a caregiver is a lot of these emotions. And a lot of times they can show up in many different ways. And I think it's really important that we know as caregivers, number one, that it's okay. Number two, that it's natural to have these feelings. And number three, there is a way that we can actually start to understand why we have those feelings, and then maybe actually do a reframe or a shift so that we can potentially move through some of this stuff and be able to work on it. And so I'm just going to move to the next slide. And here we go. So part of this, because we do have some conversations that happen here, a lot of this stuff is to be considered confidential. So anybody who does watch the video, you need to also understand that through this process that you do have to keep this information confidential. It is here to help other caregivers better understand what is happening to them and their journey. Please also listen carefully, because you may actually be feeling some of the same feelings that these other caregivers are going to share. And you have to remember, it takes a lot of courage and vulnerability to be able to share this information. So we want to make sure that you actually respect those people. And I really hope that you get to enjoy the time and the learning experience that you have today. So moving forward in this session, what you're going to find is be able to define what guilt is, what shame and regret is, and then the difference between regret and guilt, and some management strategies. Expectations. What is your motto? So this is a great time that maybe some of us can unmute ourselves. And what is your motto? Do it all, do it perfectly, never let them see you sweat, never show your weakness. But as we know, that's not our reality. Our expectations can be quite significant that we put on ourselves, but the reality, like success, it never unfortunately comes in a straight line. So I would love to hear what some of your guys' motto is. So if you want to open up and share something about what you're going through, or how maybe you are a daughter caregiving for your parent, and that because you're the only daughter out of all the siblings that maybe you're the one who's taking on a lot of responsibilities. And, you know, it would be really important to share some of that information. Anybody like to share? No? And I should also mention too that you can utilize this, again, the chat box, so that people can see what you're chatting if you actually don't want to talk. And just remember that we can keep the video off, but have the mute actually unmuted so that we can hear you speak. So I think it's important that we can have some dialogue and conversations as well throughout this process. Number one, we get to support each other that way, which is super important. And number two, somebody may be in a different part of their caregiving journey. And so I think it's important that we kind of understand that process as well. Pack your bags. We're going on a guilt trip. Who's felt that way before? If you felt that way before, just put a yes or a no in the chat box, please. Just want to see who here has felt guilt before. I know I have specifically. Awesome. Thank you, Arlene. Thank you for sharing. It's really important. So I have felt serious guilt when I don't think I'm doing a good enough job. So I guess I should probably share a little bit about my caregiving journey so that you can kind of appreciate where some of this information is coming from and that. Thank you, Rebecca, for sharing. I'm going to actually talk about my son. I know I normally share about my husband and him being military, but I have a 22-year-old son, and from the time he was quite young, I knew that he was hyperactive, and I also knew that he may potentially have a learning disorder. So there was many times that he would have tantrums out, and I was completely embarrassed. But then he started school, and I tried to figure out what was happening and trying to get him assessed. But then, they would say, I'm sorry, it's too late in the year, or whatever excuse maybe the school system came up with. But then I would have guilt that I'm not doing enough to take care of my son and advocating for him enough to fulfill the needs that he really needed. So, it's really difficult sometimes. So let's talk about guilt. What is guilt? Guilt is a feeling of responsibility or remorse for some offense, a crime, something wrong, etc., whether it's real or imaginary. And we need to remember that a lot of times, a lot of our guilt comes from our imagination. So guilt can be a healthy human reaction as a signal that we are going the wrong way. Healthy feelings of guilt can motivate us accordingly to our authentic values. And it's interesting that it says something about authentic values, because one of the things that I can assure you that sometimes guilt is because of our values that we have amongst ourselves, and we're not living up to a standard that we internally think that we should. Shame. Who here has felt some sort of shame in their lifetime? Maybe you can make an emoji. Yes, awesome. Maybe get some frowny faces or some smiley faces or some thumbs up for that too. So shame. Sometimes feel shame because my family is so different. Okay, that's really interesting that you say that. I find being unique and different can sometimes be a positive asset. Again, it's all on how we look at things. And different to who? Who does it look different to? Because I promise you there's other people that are out there that probably have lives that are very similar to you. You're just not aware of who they are. Just food for thought for right now. But shame is destructive. It's condemning its judgment of oneself. It's different from guilt. Shame started the identity rather than in a statement about your, oh, I can't even see this, your particular behavior or action. Shame says, yes, you are a bad person. Yes, you are not good enough, which has a negative effect on your self-esteem and leads to feelings of worthlessness and depression. Who has had some of that inner critic conversations about shame and how you're not good enough and you're a terrible person? I know I have. I've had it many times, especially like I said with my 22-year-old when he was younger and not doing enough for him and thinking that, you know, he deserves a much better parent than I am. Or there's been times I can recall being young and feeling I didn't deserve to have some of the things that I did in my life. So I do understand that quite well. And I've gone through depression. And something that's really interesting is that a lot of people are unaware that when you have that sadness and that feeling of not happiness in the inside, if you have those symptoms for 1 week, 7 days, you can actually be clinically diagnosed with having depression. Just think about that. Who's here been sad for more than 7 days? Again, you can put an emoji in the chat box. That would be really great if you could do that. Because I think it's important to recognize that symptoms of depression happen quite often. And it's normal to go through different bouts of depression. Coming winter, there's a lot of people who end up what's called seasonal depression, and you can go to Costco now and you can get the UV light that you can put on your face and your body to actually give you some extra vitamin D. And absolutely, Lynn, I can definitely appreciate having a daughter who has bipolar, and with her manic depression that can sometimes show up as well. I actually have a very good friend who has bipolar disorder, and sometimes it can be extremely challenging. And I'm so glad that you're sharing how you're feeling, because it's really important. But what is good to know that, yes, you're going to go through downwards steps of having depression-like symptoms. That is also normal. We have the flow, ebb and flow of different emotions, and that's really normal. And I want to put on a video here. Hopefully it'll work. Gonna have to put it on pause.
4 hour work.
Hold on, I'm just trying to share with you. Share, there we go. All right. Ooh. Let's make sure it's sharing. Can everybody see the video by chance that I'm trying to share? Should be a YouTube video. Oh, I'm just trying to pause it here. Yes, you can see the video of Brene Brown. Gonna double check here again. There we go, I think that's it. Okay, so we're gonna watch this video, and it's Brene Brown, and she is a fabulous researcher. And she talks a lot about shame, fear, and empathy. And I think it's really important that we get to hear this. So I'm just gonna play that here for you.
I thought I'm going to leave that shame stuff behind, because I spent 6 years studying shame. before I really started writing and talking about vulnerability. And I thought, thank God, because shame is this horrible topic. No one wants to talk about it. It's the best way to shut people down on an airplane. What do? I study shame. Oh. And I see you, you know. But in surviving this last year, I was reminded of a cardinal rule, not a research rule, but a moral imperative from my upbringing. You gotta dance with the one who brung you. And I did not learn about vulnerability and courage and creativity and innovation from studying vulnerability. I learned about these things from studying shame. And so I want to walk you in to shame. Jungian analysts call shame the swampland of the soul. And we're going to walk in, and the purpose is not to walk in and, you know, construct a home and live there. It is to put on some galoshes and walk through and find our way around. Here's why. We heard the most compelling call ever to have a conversation in this country, and I think globally, around race, right? Yes, we heard that. Yes? Cannot have that conversation without shame. Because you cannot talk about race without talking about privilege, and when people start talking about privilege, they get paralyzed by shame. We heard a brilliant, simple solution to not killing people in surgery, which is have a checklist. You can't fix that problem without addressing shame, because when they teach those folks how to suture, they also teach them how to stitch their self-worth to being all-powerful. And all-powerful folks don't need checklists. And I had to write down the name of this TED Fellow so I didn't mess it up here. Mishkin Ingawale. I hope I did right by you. I saw the TED Fellows my first day here, and he got up and he explained how he was driven to create some technology to help test for anemia because people were dying unnecessarily. And he said, I saw this need, so you know what I did? I made it. And everybody just burst into applause, and they were like, yes. And he said, and it didn't work. And then I made it 32 more times. And then it worked. You know what the big secret about TED is? I can't wait to tell people this. I guess I'm doing it right now. This is like the failure conference. No, it is. You know why this place is amazing? Because very few people here are afraid to fail. And no one that gets on the stage so far that I've seen has not failed. I have failed miserably, many times. I don't think the world understands that because of shame. There's a great quote that saved me this past year by Theodore Roosevelt. A lot of people refer to it as the man in the arena quote. And it goes like this: it is not the critic who counts. It is not the man who sits and points out how the doer of deeds could have done things better and how he falls and stumbles. The credit goes to the man in the arena, whose face is marred with dust and blood and sweat. But when he's in the arena, at best, he wins, and at worst, he loses. But when he fails, when he loses, he does so daring greatly. And that's what this conference to me is about. That's what life is about daring greatly, about being in the arena. When you walk up to that arena and you put your hand on the door and you think, I'm going in and I'm going to try this, shame is the gremlin who says, you're not good enough. You never finished that MBA. Your wife left you. I know your dad really wasn't in Luxembourg. He was in Sing Sing. I know those things that happened to you growing up. I know you don't think that you're pretty enough or smart enough or talented enough or powerful enough. I know your dad never paid attention even when you made CFO. Shame is that thing. And then if we can quiet it down and walk in and say, I'm going to do this, we look up and the critic that we see pointing and laughing 99% of the time is who? Us. Shame drives two big tapes: never good enough And if you can talk it out of that one, who do you think you are? The thing to understand about shame is it's not guilt. Shame is a focus on self. Guilt is a focus on behavior. Shame is I am bad. Guilt is I did something bad. How many of you, if you did something that was hurtful to me, would be willing to say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake? How many of you would be willing to say that? Guilt. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Shame. I'm sorry, I am a mistake. There is a huge difference between shame and guilt. And here's what you need to know. Shame is highly, highly correlated with addiction, depression, violence, aggression, bullying, suicide, eating disorders. And here's what you even need to know more. Guilt, inversely correlated with those things. The ability to hold something we've done or failed to do up against who we want to be is incredibly adaptive. It's uncomfortable, but it's adaptive. The other thing you need to know about shame is it's absolutely organized by gender. If shame washes over me and washes over Chris, it's going to feel the same. Everyone sitting in here knows the warm wash of shame. We're pretty sure that the only people who don't experience shame are people who have no capacity for connection or empathy. Which means, yes, I have a little shame. No, I'm a sociopath. So I would opt for, yes, you have a little shame. Shame feels the same for men and women, but it's organized by gender. For women, the best example I can give you is Anjali, the commercial. I can put the wash on the line, pack the lunches, hand out the kisses, and be work at 5 to 9. I can bring home the bacon, fry it up in the pan, and never let you forget you're a man. For women, shame is do it all, do it perfectly, and never let them see you sweat. I don't know how much perfume that commercial sold, but I guarantee you it moved a lot of antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds. Shame for women is this web of unattainable, conflicting, competing expectations about who we're supposed to be. And it's a straitjacket. For men, shame is not a bunch of competing, conflicting expectations. Shame is one. Do not be perceived as what? Weak. I did not interview men for the first 4 years of my study. And it wasn't until a man looked at me one day after a book signing and said, I love what you have to say about shame. I'm curious why you didn't mention men. And I said, I don't study men. And he said, that's convenient. And I said, why? And he said, because you say to reach out, tell our story, be vulnerable. But you see those books you just signed for my wife and my 3 daughters? I said, yeah. They'd rather me die on top of my white horse than watch me fall down. When we reach out and be vulnerable, we get the shit beat out of us. And don't tell me it's from the guys and the coaches and the dads. Because the women in my life are harder on me than anyone else. So I started interviewing men and asking questions. And what I learned is this. You show me a woman who can actually sit with a man in real vulnerability and fear, I'll show you a woman who's done incredible work. You show me a man who can sit with a woman who's just had it. She can't do it all anymore. And his first response is not, I unloaded the dishwasher. But he really listens, because that's all we need. I'll show you a guy who's done a lot of work. Shame is an epidemic in our culture. And to get out from underneath it, to find our way back to each other, we have to understand how it affects us and how it affects the way we're parenting, the way we're working, the way we're looking at each other. Very quickly, some research by Mahalik at Boston College. He asked, what do women need to do to conform to female norms? The top answers in this country: nice, thin, modest, and use all available resources for appearance. When he asked about men, what do men in this country need to do to conform with male norms? The answers were always show emotional control, work is first, pursue status, and violence. If we're going to find our way back to each other, we have to understand and know empathy, because empathy is the antidote to shame. If you put shame in a petri dish, it needs 3 things to grow exponentially: secrecy, silence, and judgment. If you put the same amount of shame in a petri dish and douse it with empathy, it can't survive. The 2 most powerful words when we're in struggle: me too.
Okay, so I'm just gonna switch back to the other screen here. What are your guys' thoughts on that? I want to know, because I think it's really important that we understand where shame and guilt come from. So let's talk about regret. Regret is a feeling of sadness, distress, or remorse over something that happened in the past. It can be experienced by a variety of different feelings that come with experience, honest acceptance of past and present events. Acceptance does not mean we agree with or like what happened. It is simply a non-judgmental acknowledgement of the present. I feel badly that this happened and I wish things could be different. Who's had regret? Make an emoji, put yes. I actually did a call, a message yesterday, or a talk yesterday at the 30th annual palliative care. And we talked about the emotional journey of a caregiver, and regret was one of the emotions that came up. And one of the things I do want to mention, was grief, so was shame. But one of the things I do want to mention is when we are a caregiver, we have a really hard time identifying with anything other than the 5 basic emotions. And so when we start to outspread different emotions, it can be really difficult for us, number one, to feel and identify what we're actually feeling. So for you guys to actually know that you have guilt and what that looks like for you, or regret, I think is very empowering, because with that knowledge, we can learn how to reframe what is happening in our thought process. So how we can differentiate between regret and guilt. Regret is a sister to guilt, as we kind of heard in Brene Brown's TED Talk. It's a feeling often prevents itself in situations that involve loss. And we have to also identify when I say that, because loss doesn't mean necessarily a loss of somebody that we care about. It could be the loss of somebody who they used to be. And I always like to use the example with this is my husband was injured in 2006 in Afghanistan, and he came back and was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. The guy he was in 2004 was not the same guy he is now in 2019. Don't get me wrong, he was great back then, and then he was awful when he was going through some of his triggered stuff. And I had to learn to let go and feel the loss of who he was in 2004 so that I could learn to accept who he was at the time and what was going on. So if we think of when we're caregiving and we're looking after maybe a parent, and I'm just using different things that come off the top of my head, but a parent who has dementia and some mobility issues. Well, what we tend to find out is that we see our parent as this strong person who done so many different things for us over the years, and now they're having memory losses and they're having mobility issues, and it's really hard seeing that person that we thought who was so strong now not strong anymore. Does that make sense? Can everybody relate to that? A hands up in the chat box. if you can relate to that. So before you accept the responsibility of guilt for some action or inaction, examine the motives. Where are those motives coming from? Your physical and emotional condition and other circumstances around the event. And ask yourself these questions. Did you intentionally cause to harm another person? Yes or no? If you're willing to share, I would love to hear your answers to these questions. So we'll do 1 for yes and 2 for no. Did you ever intentionally cause harm to another person that you're caregiving for? Is it my responsibility to change the problem? Again, 1 for yes, 2 for no. Is it realistic for me to try to fix the problem? 1 for yes, 2 for no. Now, I also wanted to kind of touch base and talk about how shame and guilt might look. So shame, again, you know, we heard some examples with Brene Brown, but I don't deserve to be happy. I can't do anything right. I am broken. I am stupid. I am bad. I'm undeserving. I am not lovable. I am not okay. I am a bad person or a bad caregiver. If you felt any of that particular shame, put a H in the text box. Trying to change it up instead of yes and no's and 1s and 2s. Now, if you've had guilt, I am not responsible for my care recipient's happiness, or I am responsible for my care recipient's happiness. I should always be cheerful. I am not ill, disabled, physically challenged, so I should not complain. I should not make mistakes. I should prevent mistakes. I must always be responsible, conscientious, and giving to others. I feel guilt, then I must be doing something wrong. And I want you to put an L in the chat box if you've ever felt one of those things. Right? Now, what if I told you that we're going to actually learn about a system that you can actually go in, instead of looking at all this stuff and how you're feeling based on situations right now and these emotions, to perceive them in a different way? Because when we are thinking of things in an emotional standpoint and we put this inner critic on us, because everything that we are talking about here and these emotions that we're feeling are coming from our inner critic, that inner voice that tells us that we are not good enough and I should have more responsibility and I should always be happy, and because I'm not sick I should, you know, be the best and I should stop complaining. You need to, first things that you need to do for the management of all of these emotions is acknowledge the emotion that you are feeling. This is especially important when it comes to guilt and shame, because when we ignore it and bottle it up, it just pushes it down. So think of a cup, and when we have that cup and we try to put different layers of things in, and then we start getting to the top, and maybe it's a sponge, and as we get to the top and add another sponge and we push it down, it goes down for maybe a half a second, but then it pushes back up. But if we push the sponge down hard enough, sometimes it actually pops right out. And that is no different than how guilt and shame impact our lives in a negative way. Does that make sense to you guys? And when we hold on to those feelings and we've had them bottled up for so long, that's when it can lead to depression. That's when it can lead to us feeling worthless. That's when we can have outbursts of anger and frustration. And we need to understand those feelings, that negative feeling, and those behaviors that are coming with it before we can actually bring them forward and move forward. Take control. That inner dialogue, that inner critic, the one that's calling you stupid, I'm lazy, I can't do anything. Stop it. Because I promise you, if you're a caregiver, you care too much and you've been doing a lot of stuff. So you need to understand that you're not lazy. You're doing everything you can. You have to be knowledgeable in the areas that you're taking care of, whatever or whoever it is that your care recipient is. We need to learn how to correct what we're happening and then reframe those statements. So for an example, I'm lazy. It can be reframed into, I need to get motivated. Who doesn't need to be motivated? I know I need to get motivated sometimes. Sometimes I'm just exhausted and overwhelmed and I want to really do nothing except sit on my couch. Or what if you say, I can't do anything right and laugh it off? What if you said, man, I messed it up, but I'm only human? Still saying I can't do anything right, but doing it in a positive mind frame when you recognize that. So first thing again is to acknowledge that emotion, and it's going to happen. You're going to use your negative self characteristics and it's going to come out. I don't know how to do anything right. And then at that time you have a moment to recognize that you said that and then reframe it in, you know what? I really messed that up, but I'm human and that's okay. Because if you think of some of the things that we are so hard and that inner critic is on ourselves, if we reframe it and look if it was somebody else, what would that look like? So now you got to identify the other feelings that are going on. So often when feelings are accompanied with guilt and shame, like frustration, the resentment, you need to also understand and you have to acknowledge that too. And you need to think of something like, I hate to admit it, but I'm resentful of my family or not helping more with my care receiver. You also need to understand that's all normal feelings. So for your care recipient, have you ever felt that way? Have you ever been resentful because you're just tired and you don't want to help out anymore? I assure you that everybody who is a caregiver has felt that way at one point or another. That does not make you a bad caregiver. And I think that's super important to understand. Be compassionate with yourselves. We all have bad days. It is part of human nature. You know, we can see the person behind those behaviors. We're so hard on ourselves. And sometimes it just helps to tell yourself whatever it is that you would tell your friend in that situation. You know, a question is, are you compassionate with other people? I want a happy face emoji if you are, please. Just so I can see that you guys are still here and listening to me. Because chances are you are. Yes, see? Thank you, Lynn. You're compassionate. But you're never compassionate with yourself, are you? Now what we got to do is we need to identify what those bad behaviors or those actions are. Because if we let those negative emotions to snowball and attack our self-esteem, that inner critic, those bad characteristic traits that we focus on ourselves, everyone makes mistakes. And that specific, you know, the idea is to identify what that specific behavior or action in question might be. So I would love if somebody could unmute themselves and maybe talk about a behavior that they, or an action that they have done that they have a lot of guilt or shame around. And again, this is a non-judgmental place. So it's really important that we have the opportunity to share these, because what I would like to do is kind of reframe that situation and show you how things actually could be very different just based on learning how to use different behaviors within the same situation. So if you are willing to be vulnerable and courageous and do that, just unmic yourself and share your story and let us know. No? Okay. So next we're going to talk about taking control. But one of the things that I do actually I kind of want to go back here for a second. So when we identify some bad behaviors or actions, so I'm going to speak on an example of a situation or an action that I know. And one of those things are with the peer, and the peer is extremely frustrated that the parent that they're looking after is up 8 or 9 times through the night. They're having memory problems. They're at the point that their care recipient does not want to get out of bed, and they are trying to forcefully get that care recipient out of the bed. And of course, there's resentment because she's also tired. And at wit's end, to be quite honest with you, she's not sure what the next steps are to take. Now, one of the best things that we can do is, number one, is identifying what's happening. Well, we can understand that that behavior and that action of the impatientness, the anger and the frustration is most likely come, number one, with the irritability, because she is not rested. Does that make sense? You can make an emoji or something in the chat box just so we can see that that does make sense. And with that lack of sleep, it's really hard to stay focused and to have patience. And we also need to remember, with those behaviors and stuff like that, she would never do it to somebody that she didn't know, but she's tired and she's looking after this care recipient day in and day out with no reprieve. Sounds familiar to a lot of us caregivers. And so she called in and was asking, you know, what could she do to kind of help alleviate some of the stresses. And one of the things that we had talked about is having an assessment done to determine what the needs that her care recipient needs right now. Because some of them are medical, because if she's not moving and getting out of bed and she's having sores show up on her body, there's a medical reason. So there may be an opportunity to have somebody come in through home care to be able to support. And we also need to understand that, and a lot of times we think of home care, it could be a senior or an aging person, but that's not necessarily true. If we have somebody who has an illness or disability, sometimes, you know, they're not feeling up to par, and some of those same behaviors can show up in a care recipient who is also in a younger generation, and that caregiver is still tired. It kind of brings me back to the days, the exhausted feeling when you have a newborn baby in your house in some ways. But when we get older, sometimes, you know, it's a lot more difficult on our bodies, and then our bodies start to shut down when we're tired as well. So it's coming up with ways to look at what we could do differently, because when we're thinking, she's not doing it, we have the resentment, I'm done, I'm tired, I don't want to do this anymore. And we try to, you know, find solutions. Sometimes we look at it and we're extremely impatient even with some of the options that might be available also. And sometimes we're also in a place that we aren't ready to hear what some of those options might be. So we also get defensive with regards to them. But one of the solutions could be for this caregiver who is extremely exhausted is asking somebody for help. So maybe they have a friend or a family member who might be able to come over even, 2 nights a week so that she could have some reprieve through the night and spend the night there just to make sure that that care recipient is taken care of. Or maybe they can look at some overnight home care or some respite options. It just depends on what the situations in that are. Does that make sense? So we can reframe those behaviors based on thinking kind of outside the box to come up with other options. And then taking control. Instead of saying I'm a terrible person and stuff, we don't have to do that. Yeah, we messed up. We're human. We make mistakes. And that gives us control over the situation. So when we can identify that, we're human, we make mistakes. Again, what would you say to a friend? If a friend was going through the exact same situation that you are, would you be as hard on them as you are on yourself? Yes or no? A Y or an N? No, you're right. Absolutely. So why are you so hard on yourselves? What is it that is causing you to be so darn hard on yourself? Nobody deserves to be spoken to the way that we speak to ourselves. We would never say that to another human being. So why do we say it to ourselves? So one of the things, we had our caregivers community support last Thursday night. And one of the tools that I actually talked and spoke about was called a mirroring system. And I think it could be very beneficial to kind of help to start to reframe some of the actions and behaviors that we're taking. So I'm going to share that with you. So the mirror system, how it works, it's actually a cognitive behavioral technique. And what it is taking the situation that you're in, that you have guilt surrounded by, or shame, and looking at it from your perspective. And a lot of times it's really good to write it down because then it kind of gives you a clearer indication. So that's the first step. Oh, hi. Hi, Diane. Oh, maybe you muted yourself. So the first step is identifying how you're feeling and what's happening in that situation. The next step is whoever that care recipient is and what their thought process may be based on that situation and how your behavior is maybe making them feel. And then the next step is actually being somebody in the room there that can see what's happening amongst the two of you as the caregiver and the care recipient. And then I just want you to go out one step further and look in over that as if you were, say, a fly in the wall in the room with the three of you. And I want you to identify what you see with the 4 different situations because everybody's perception is going to be different. But now what I want you to do in the last mirrored aspect of it is look at all the evidence through what every position and every perception would be. And then identify, if I went and did some wellness things, would that actually be okay? Would my care recipient be in danger? Would I have some reprieve? Would I be able to take a nap? Whatever that may look like, but look at the evidence-based information. And then from there, you can make an informed decision based on that evidence and how you are feeling and see if that's actually validated. And I will guarantee you it won't be. You'll start to be able to identify that your guilt is coming from a value system that you have on an extremely high standard for your own self. And those expectations that anybody else would have within that same room for what is happening is not what they perceive to be happening. Does that make sense? Does everybody kind of understand what I'm suggesting? You can do a yes. Okay, perfect. Awesome. Yeah, Lynn, you know what? It works really well because what it does, it takes out our personal emotion in the situation and it gives us a clearer indication to look at exactly what the evidence shows us. And it takes the personal out of it. So it can be used in so many different situations and scenarios. And I really encourage you guys to do it because what it can do is it can teach you to reframe how that inner critic is working within your own physical body. Because if we can start to identify why we're holding on to that guilt, that shame, and that regret, and we can reframe it in a way that it's actually taking it out of what we call in the holistic world, the energetic level, it can actually benefit you to a point that it can reduce your stress levels and that cortisol that's going through your body significantly. And I think that's really important to know. And then again, take action. So what a great way to do it. We just learned about the mirror activity and how that you can look at all the different information there. And, you know, you may even want to open up a dialogue or conversation with whoever that care recipient is and let them know if you have the ability to do so, because it would obviously just depend on what that disability might be, what that illness is, maybe if it was dementia, what stage it's at. So it will look different for everybody, but you have an opportunity to potentially apologize and explain maybe why you've been acting that way and understand that it is stressful and you need to learn how to sometimes, again, take action and ask for help and be able to move forward through the process, because it's not an easy process being a caregiver. If it was, I actually have no words because I don't think it is. You know, when we talk again about the emotions, it's hard. The best thing that I want you to do is forgive yourself. So for all of those actions that we're talking about and all of the guilt and resentment and stuff that you have going on, forgive yourself. It's not an easy thing to do. But if we continue to punish ourselves for everything that we have guilt about or everything that we're shameful for, it is just going to hold us and pull us down. And it's going to feel like we have a building on top of us of weights. And we don't need that. You have enough stress in your lives as a caregiver. We need to find ways to be able to reduce it and learn how to forgive. Now, I have to, mention too, and I think this is super important, that just because you're forgiving yourself doesn't mean that you're going to forget what the situation is, because we want to use it as an opportunity to reframe and reflect on how things can be better for the next time. I think it's really important to understand that every opportunity can be a learning experience. When a bad situation happens, or the guilt shows up for going to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves, and maybe coming next Tuesday to our Fall into Wellness Fair that we're having here at Caregivers Alberta, and enjoying some respite, that there is no guilt associated to that, because you taking care of yourself and your own well-being is actually a benefit to whoever your care recipient is, because sometimes we'll get sick. And if we're not taking care of us number one, we can't take care of the person that they're expecting us to take care of. So accept that you made the mistake, and then take the appropriate actions to reframe what is happening, reflect, and move on, and just let it go. And be good enough. Guilt and shame arises so many expectations that we put on ourselves, as I talked about. Caregiving is circumstances change, and you need to make some changes. We need to be able to adapt as we go through the process, and that's okay. And it's okay not to be okay. We can't have amazing days every day. It's unrealistic. It's okay to have a world of emotions that can show up in one day. It's how we can actually gain coping strategies to be able to move forward. So be aware of that. Again, I've said it before, ask for help. You are still wonderful. You're still a compassionate person. If you're overwhelmed and you feel like you just need some support, it's okay. Nobody's going to judge you for that. They're actually going to say, wow, that's pretty amazing that you actually ask for support. Because in most cases, we never do. I know for myself, when somebody goes, you know what, just let me know if you need a hand. I'm more than happy to come and help you. And I'm like, no, it's no problem. I got it. I got it until I don't. And a lot of times when we're sitting here and we're calling into Caregivers Alberta, we're at the crisis point where we're asking for help. But if we would have asked for help a little bit earlier amongst our caregiving journey, we would be better set up for success in that particular role. Does that make sense? A yay or an A would be great. So there has never been a need to be perfect caregivers. Only caregivers who care. Some of us aren't asked to be put in the position of being caregivers. Sometimes it's a responsibility we fall on whether we want or not. And you know what? That happens. The thing is how can we better prepare in that journey of being a caregiver? You know, whoever it is that we're caring for, we do care deeply about them. That's why we call it caregivers. We are there to help support our care recipient in any way possible. And waiting till we're in the crisis point isn't always the best option. Wouldn't it be better to at least have a plan of action? And whether that's using Caregivers Alberta for that plan of action to help support you in any way you want, should you feel uncomfortable to reach out to some of your friends and family, that's also okay. We have a huge database, and we have an opportunity to be able to actually support you in many, many, many different ways. So there is a writing exercise, and it's just write a situation or circumstances that you have felt shame, guilt, or regret. And then after you've done that, and we're not going to do it here online because we're running out of time, but I want you to really do that initially. And then I want you to write a letter to a friend, but I want you to reply as if you're writing a letter back to a friend that was in the circumstance that you felt the shame, guilt, or regret in. And if you would like to share how that response system worked and how you may have learned something from it, I urge you and I encourage you to send me an email and let me know how that worked out for you. So ladams@caregiversalberta.ca is my email. Bless me. Bless me. And criticism. This is actually the same Theodore Roosevelt comment that Brene Brown said, actually. So I'm not going to reread it out. But again, you know, you have an opportunity here to change your thought process. And I really hope that this info session has given you an opportunity to kind of reflect and be able to reframe some of the thought processes that you were doing and having, and that we can, you know, move forward together and know that you're not alone in these situations, and that there is opportunity to be supported in ways that you may never have yet before or felt like you've been supported, and utilize us. Come to our caregiver support community nights. Our next one is November 21st. We also have our Fall into Wellness that's happening next Tuesday, October 29th from 5 to 8 p.m. There's a number of wonderful vendors that are going to be there. The goal is for you as caregivers to have body, mind, and spirit balance. And we'll also be there. So if there's situation and other caregivers that'll be there, I do ask you to register for that event. And Tristan has also provided her email up here in the chat box. And I'm sure she could probably put in the Eventbrite link as well, so that you can register for those two events that are coming up. But also remember, we are here with a phone call, an email, a chat bot off the website. We're here if you want to come in and have a cup of coffee and just have some place that you can share what is happening so you feel validated. Because a lot of times we don't get the opportunity to tell people how we're feeling, and we feel as if nobody has time for us to do that. And I promise you, I am more than willing to have that coffee and sit down and make sure that you have an opportunity to be heard, to be supported. So I'm going to open this up to any questions if you have for the next couple of minutes. So if you do have a question, please. What is my name? My name is Lisa Adams. I'm the caregiver advisor here at Caregivers Alberta. Oh, you missed this. So the second part of the writing exercise was now to, after you've written the first part, is to actually write a letter back in response to that letter that you sent, but that letter is actually from a friend, or you're sending it as a friend perspective. And what would you say to them if it was them writing you a letter? Am I able to download the slides? I should be able to put it into a PDF version that you can see. Yes, Lynn. If you want to send me an email again at ladams@caregiversalberta.ca, then I can shoot you over the slides for sure. I want to thank you all for taking the time to participate within the questions. I also want to thank you for answering some of the questions and being vulnerable through this process. And again, I want you to know you're not alone on this journey, and reach out to us if you're needing support. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you very much, Mary. And I hope to see you next week for the Fall into Wellness night. And enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.